Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle, and this is my 71st video looking at detective fiction written by British authors better known for their science fiction. John Russell Fearn began his science fiction career in the American pulp magazines in Amazing Stories in the June 1933 issue. There we see Fearn's debut story, which was a two-part serial, The Intelligent Gigantic. Illustrated by Leo Morey. So that's how Fearn began his career in the science fiction pulp magazines. But by 1936, the market had expanded and changed. Amazing Stories had been overtaken by Astounding Stories. Much better authors and stories. Astounding became the new field leader. And then it was soon joined by Thrilling Wonder Stories, which also overtook Amazing. The magazine field was in a state of continuing flux. Realizing that in order to continue to sell to constantly changing markets, Fearn needed to be able to change his style, so he created several pseudonyms and experimented with different styles, thereby increasing his sales chances. In the January 1938 Astounding, for instance, he appeared with three stories. In the contents page. There's himself, and there's Thornton Ayre, and there's Polton Cross. Three stories in the same issue. In July 1937, Fearn wrote to his friend Walter Gillings, editor of Britain's first science fiction magazine, Tales of Wonder, to reveal that he was planning to switch from science fiction to the wider detective story market. I'm turning my scientific angles to account in the production of a scientific detective for England, a book, by the way. Be 2 years in the making, I expect. Chief Guy is a scientist and solves all kinds of things that puzzle Scotland Yard. I'm trying to get out of the rut of Frenchmen, Chinamen and what have you with this yarn. Guy will be something like Nero Wolfe, only drinks tea, not beer. Bear with me a second. As the American science fiction magazine market continued to expand, Fearn, as a full-time professional writer with a widowed mother to support, was obliged to continue writing mainly science fiction, with only occasional forays into detective and crime shorts for the American pulp magazine Thrill and Mystery Stories. Now, all of the stories that appeared in that magazine can be found online today in new collections such as Liquid Death and Other Stories, and Death Asks a Question, and most recently in Pulp Adventures magazine. Bear with me, just see what page the Fearn story is on, page 105. There you see, the Whaling Hybrid is reprinted in this new American magazine published by Bold Venture Press. And then there was another thrilling mystery story there, which we see, Death Asks a Question. So Fearn's proposed book for English publishers, featuring his tea-drinking scientist detective, would remain unwritten for many years. Thus, Fearn'S most successful science fiction magazine pseudonym was Fearn'S, incorporating the techniques of mystery and detective fiction. Fearn'S American agent, Julius Schwartz, dubbed these new style stories as web work, pointing out their parallels with the work of American detective writer Harry Stephen Keeler. Fearn went on the record saying, "I've become fascinated enough by this new technique in the books of Harry Stephen Keeler, the American webwork master, to spend a lot of time in between science fiction putting together webwork novels, not scientific, just a mesh of conflicting strands of mystery. So far, I've not had time to complete my ideas, but by the end of this year, I hope to finish the first 90,000 word book. For England, it will be an almost new style of writing, and that's where I hope to cash in." But the advent of the Second World War disrupted Fearn's plans, and he was forced, for economic reasons, to continue to work in the science fiction pulps. However, he experimented further with introducing detective fiction elements into his science fiction short stories. In November 1939, Fearn sent a letter to one of his regular correspondents, Tyro author and cinema buff William F. Temple, in which he referred to Amazing Stories editor Ray Palmer having accepted his story, The Man Who Saw Two Worlds. Bear with me. Page 55. Palmer there accepted this story, The Man Who Saw Two Worlds by Fearn'S, which we see there. "In this story," wrote Fearn, "I introduce Brutus Lloyd, the first genuine criminologist who dabbles in scientific riddles, who's conceited, masterful and breezy. Palmer seems to like him immensely and requires more. I called him Alkaloid, but Palmer refused to be sold on it." The story is actually Wells's The Plattner story brought bang up to date, and Lloyd is based on Ernest Truex in the film Ambush, starring Lloyd Nolan. Now, Bruce Lloyd was popular with Amazing Stories readers, and so two further novelettes were published over the next couple of years. Two further Lloyd novelettes. The Case of the Murdered Servants. Case of the Murdered Servants. And the last Lloyd story on page 210 was The Case of the Meswick Monsters, which you can see the Robert Fuqua illustrations for. That was the last Brutus Lloyd novelette published in Amazing Stories. In January 1940, Fearn had confided in another letter to Temple that he was determined to move away from the pulps and break into the wider book market. He told Temple that he was engaged on the first draft of a detective novel. The title will be Black Maria, M.A. It embodies the new idea of a headmistress from Suffolk who goes to the US to solve the riddle of her brother's apparent suicide. And to do this, she follows out the ideas she's read in Yank mags and seen in gangster films on the QT. See the gag? The young will have an equal chance on both sides of the water for a tryout. Later, he told Temple how he now felt that detective stories were his real forte, and he was thinking of gradually chucking SF and turning entirely to detective mysteries. Long and short, I love them. In March 1940, Fearn reported to Temple that he'd completed his first draft of the novel. But now I'm damned if I can find the time to type out the final copy. It just lies and lies while I churn out stuff in between for endless streams of ever-appearing American magazines and try to get some order into things to give Cornell the best I can do. This latter remark was a reference to the proposed new British SF magazine, New Worlds, to be edited by John Cornell. Cornell told me later that Fearn had submitted hundreds of thousands of words of science fiction to him, from which he'd selected several stories, only for the magazine to be aborted later in 1940 when the financial backer was exposed as a con man and fled the country. 1940 saw the peak of Fearn's production for the American pulp magazines, with more than 24 of his stories appearing that year alone. The exigencies of the war and the collapse of the British SF market dictated that he had to concentrate on his established US markets. Then, in 1943, following delay in obtaining payment from his agent for his stories in the US, Fearn broke with him and made a determined effort to break out of the pulps into the English book market. He took his time, writing to a much higher literary standard, and this time he made it. He finished Black Maria and succeeded in selling it to Rich & Cowan, an established hardcover imprint of the giant Hutchinson UK publishing chain. It was an immediate success, and Fearn was invited to write sequels. Under the contractual pen name of John Slate. Slate had been his late father's middle name. So there, he was commissioned to write all the John Slate novels, which we see there. Now in 1949, Walter Gillings was now the editor of Hutchinson's crime book magazine, and he asked Fearn to write an article in their featured series, Detectives of Fiction, telling how he invented the character of his school mom, Sleuth. Fearn himself told the inside story of his remarkable character. Let's take a look at this interesting little magazine. There we see it. Fearn himself told the inside story of his remarkable character. Miss Maria Black was conceived in my mind out of no more than a memory, a childhood memory of a distant relative with the commanding manner of a general and the logical mind of an analyst. She underwent modifications and alterations in the course of her development until she emerged as an elderly headmistress with a fund of knowledge, of psychological insight, and above all, an understanding of human nature. Now, the ladies supervising a successful girls' college should also possess all the attributes of a keen student of crime seemed at first too much to expect. And if Maria had remained a straight character, she would probably not have got beyond the first hurdle. But by infusing some humour into the situation, I could easily imagine Miss Maria being so human in herself as to sneak off to enjoy her favourite pastime when nobody was looking. Hence her clandestine visits to the local cinema, where crime films hold sway, and her ruling that none of her pupils should go there in case they see her in the 1 and 9s. The name of Maria Black was suggested by another of my relatives, and such I christened her once I saw that the beauty of the name lies in its reversibility, especially among schoolgirls looking for an alternative to the beak. Then one can hardly associate a Black Maria from a police van, which is suggestive of criminals brought to book. Maria's first appearance in Black Maria M.A. took her to America, where she encountered the contrasting character Pulp Martin, the gentlemanly tough from the Bowery. I became so fond of him that he continued to act as Maria's bodyguard in her later adventures, doing for her the sort of work she can't do herself while preserving her dignity. His flamboyance, his foul cigarettes and atrocious suits served to offset her straight-back frigidity and strengthen the humour, which is a dominant strain in the Maria novels. After briefly describing the remaining novels, Fearn concluded, "In all her cases, Maria uses quite conventional means to achieve her effects. Scorning the elaborate paraphernalia of the professional detective, she's always careful to stay on her own side of the fence while assisting justice to assert itself. When she can't prove a point by forensic methods, she shames the professionals into doing it and so gains her end, her strong suit being the biting sarcasm she employs when the ponderous juggernaut of the law misses the mark." Now here's a quick summation of the plots of these books, which are amongst the finest Fearn ever wrote. Black Maria M.A. When Ralph Black, chain store magnate, was found shot by his own gun in his locked library, the New York police pronounced it as suicide, but there were members of his own family who believed that he was murdered. The sister, Maria Black M.A., stern headmistress of a school for girls in southern England, has a weakness for solving crime puzzles in her spare time and jumps at the chance of putting her theories to the test when she learns of the alleged murder of her brother. She travels to America and there, enlisting the aid of Bowery thugs to help her, sets to work to trace the mysterious plot against her brother to the final unmasking of the amazing truth. Maria marches on, also known as the murdered schoolgirl. Maria Black, head of Roseway College for Young Ladies and textbook solver of crimes, finds herself faced with a problem after her own heart, when to her college there comes the strange, haughty Frances Hasley, daughter of a somewhat mysterious major. Within a few days, the girl is found hanged in a neighbouring wood, in circumstances that seem to be devoid of clues and without motive. Scotland Yard is called in to solve the horrifying crime, but Black Maria has her own unique system. By degrees, she follows a trail that leads her through a maze of intrigue to the eventual discovery of the murderer. In One Remains Seated, Maria Black doesn't expect to come face to face with murder in her favourite cinema, when a stranger seated in number 11 on row A is found to be dead. The baffling crime enables her to take on her role of detective and become once again Black Maria, the tireless crime solutionist. Determined to get to the root of the mystery, she works side by side with the stolid Inspector Morgan, local police chief. Together they follow a tangled trail that takes them behind the scenes of a cinema, into the homes of the hard-working folk who strove to maintain the entertainment industry during the war, and into the recesses of a killer's mind. These first three novels are all actually set during the Second World War. The next novel after the war was Thy Arm Alone. Betty Shapley was a local beauty for whose charms three young men fell heavily, but she never expected that her coquetry would lead to the sudden and horrifying brutal death of one of her admirers, the shy, inoffensive Herbert Pollitt, and the life of a fugitive for another, Vincent Gray, and the role of a murder case witness and suspect for the third, Tom Clayton. Inspector Morgan and Sergeant Claythorne of the local police investigate the death and suspect the now vanished Vincent Gray, against whom the evidence seems overwhelming. So Betty, once a pupil of Roseway College for Young Ladies, asked the forbidding Black Maria, the headmistress detective, to prove Gray's innocence. Thy Arm Alone was such a classic novel that it was reprinted a few years later by another publisher, and we see that edition there. The final Maria novel was Death in Silhouette. Invited to attend the engagement celebrations of an ex-pupil of her college, Maria finds herself involved in the mysterious suicide of the prospective bridegroom, Keith Robinson. All the circumstances, death by hanging in a locked cellar, point to the fact that Keith took his own life. The coroner too is satisfied that such was the case, but certain peculiar factors lead Black Maria to think otherwise. So, aided by her Bowery companion, Pulp Martin, she sets out to prove how Keith really died, and in doing so uncovers an ingenious plan of cold-blooded murder. But who is the killer and why? Now, the last John Slate novel was Framed in Guilt, and this remaining Slate novel didn't feature Black Maria. It tells of William Barrage, meek and mild head clerk to a prominent solicitor, who's found with a dagger in his back, lying on the floor of his employer's locked private office. See him there through the keyhole. How could a man so innocuous possibly have an enemy bitter enough to wish to stab him to death? Such as the seemingly impossible crime that Superintendent Henshaw faces when he's called in to investigate. The further the superintendent probes, the more it becomes clear that William Barrage had been anything but the man he seemed. His mysterious connections extend far out to Australia to encompass his highly successful brother, whilst at home he has associations with an attractive potential divorcee who might have had reason for wishing to kill him. To the suspects is also added Henry Minden, Barrage's employer, the only person having a key to the locked office. Now then, the 6 John Slate novels were first published in hardcover in the UK between 1944 and 1950, but the first 2 were translated into French paperbacks in the 1950s, prompting the French crime fiction expert Roland Le Corbier to include Black Maria in his non-fiction book. See that French book there? Non-fiction book, 99 Chambres Closes. The book celebrated and listed 99 of the greatest locked room detective novels ever published in France, ranking Black Maria alongside the finest creations of such authors as Gaston Leroux, S.S. Van Dyne, C. Daly King, Frederick Brown, Agatha Christie, and dozens of others. There we see Fearn'S Black Maria is analysed and celebrated as one of the greatest detective stories published in France. Now then, after that was published, I was invited by Maxim Jakubowski to contribute with Bob Eady to his award-winning book, 100 Great Detectives. Bear with me a second. Let's find the entry. It's 37. And in this book, I contributed an essay on Black Maria. It's my favourite detective. I arranged for 4 of the Mariah titles to be reprinted under Fearn'S own name in Italian paperback and hardcover editions. See the yellow background books there. In paperback, some of them were reprinted, as you can see. So very successful. And then finally, 3 of them appeared in those big hardcover volumes. And then here we see all the books that were published by Wildside, and on the bottom line there, F.A. Thorpe's Linford Mystery Library. All of these books can now be bought online. So, now back in the 1940s, within a couple of years of selling Black Mariah, Fearn had a second hardcover contract under his belt, writing a separate series of detective novels for another Hutchinson imprint, Stanley Paul, under yet another pseudonym, Hugo Blaine. We'll take a look at these in my next video.